You're not getting Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines. You're missing out on plenty of action and excitement from the entire wrestling world. Each month, Pro Wrestling Illustrated brings you 73 power-packed pages of match coverage, interviews, special features, exclusive ratings, and the famous Pro Wrestling Illustrated full-color centerfold. During this LPWA Boutique special offer, receive a full year of Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, 12 big issues for the low price of just $19.95. That's 30% off the newsstand price.
Press play! Where's the magic finger? Pressing down. Yeah.
The Wrestling Club with Darren and Brett. We've got a show that you'll never forget.
Greetings, Grapple fans, and welcome to WFMU's Wrestling Club, the only space that's safe for all wrestling fans, whether you're casual, lapsed, obsessed, or ashamed. I'm Darren Maybe, broadcasting from my humble abode here in the McGinley Square district of Jersey City, New Jersey, where tonight we have, this is a big show for us. This is, we're going to be, speaking to wrestling media royalty tonight. We'll be joined later on in the program by Pro Wrestling Illustrated's Kevin McElvaney to talk the Pro Wrestling Illustrated 500, which has a lot of wrestling club connections in it. We'll also take your phone calls to talk the PWI 500. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can call us on our hotline at 732-200-CLUB. That's 732-200-CLUB. You can also text that number. You can chime in on the chat. You can tweet us and, just get it out there. You want to make your voice heard. Tonight is the night to do it. Everybody loves talking lists, and we are no different than you. And by we, I mean me and my tag team partner, coming to us live via satellite from Hollywood, California, the Tracy Richards to my Beverly Shade, Brett Davis. Brett,
that one I don't recognize Tracy Richards as Beverly Shade's famous tag team partner.
You don't know Tracy the Arm Richards and Beverly the Hammer Shade.
I've heard of Beverly Shade.
There we go, right there. The Arm and Hammer connection. They're kind of like the Glamour Girls, but less glamorous and more gruff.
Oh wow, I love the look. I love that they look like legit badasses. Yeah, the Arm and Hammer connection is a genius.
That's right, it's great, and they're mean. They're not nice. They're not fan favorites, you might say. Not as hot as Judy and Leilani, but
do we have little flowers in the hair too?
I think that's just like a stain. I think they got but anyway, well, this is a big night, Brett.
This is a big night. We're talking the PWI 500. It is Darren, what is your first memory of Pro Wrestling Illustrated? Because pre-internet, or internet being as common as it was, PWI was and still is the forbidden door, really. Like, it was the way that you could find things out, learn about different promotions, be like, oh, I thought this wrestler disappeared, he's actually champion here or there.
My first memory of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, or it's not like a first memory, but like what I remember is I would go to the grocery store with my parents as a child, and there was a magazine section, and they had Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, and Pro Wrestling Illustrated, all that we call now the after mags. And I would read them while my parents shopped, and then I'd ask them to buy them, and if I was lucky, they would buy them, and I would always I'd always read them. And I remember the PWI 500. I knew maybe the first 30, 40 wrestlers, and it got a little deeper, and it was kind of, some of those old lists have the most obscure, ungoogleable wrestlers. So what else do I remember? I remember Sabu being number 5. I remember always looking forward to it because I feel like I would learn about wrestlers and get excited for them. Like, Sabu was number 5, I think, in 1994, and I never heard of him. And then, like, I look in I started paying attention. I'm like, oh, this guy is really scary. Dean Malenko, I remember, wasn't he number 1 in 97, 98? That was a big one for me. I loved Dean Malenko when I was 12. I didn't have a lot of friends. What about you, Brett? What do you? I mean, you were the same as me. You were reading those magazines. I know you were more of a Raw magazine kind of kid. You know, a little horny guy, a little horny Brett.
Yeah. And speaking of Raw, Darren, do you have Raw on in case there's something
Oh,
noteworthy?
I will put it on. I'll put it on now. I have to.
We have had some teases today. We don't obviously doing a show during Raw, so we're not terribly invested in the program, but we are a wrestling program, and as journalists, we need to carry on the PWI legacy and report on everything.
I have it right now. I can see the live. It looks like Nikki ASH is chatting with her friend Rhea, and here are my girls. The Arm and Hammer connection of WWE. Which tag team do you think I'm talking about?
I think you're talking about Eva and Dewdrop.
No, what? No,
Nia and Shayna.
No, Natty and Tamina.
Oh, they are your favorite, and they are the Arm and Hammer connection of modern day. But to answer your question, we had a, I think a lot of wrestling fans maybe knew the one place in town where they could get PWI because it wasn't in every store. But
we should say I'm a little bit older than you, so. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, it was at everyone. By like the time I was in middle school, it was gone. Continue.
Yeah. But we had Krausers. They had them in the corner, and the owner of the Krausers every time, without fail, would think that we're looking at the porno magazines that were right next to it, and we'd have to explain, no, we're just wrestling nerds.
Been there.
And then, years later, it was always, I could usually find it at the Hudson News in Penn Station. And when I'd commute in and out of New York City from New Jersey, if there was a new PWI out, I'd sit with it on my little 40-minute train ride.
I love wrestling magazines. It's one of I'm not a big collector of things, really. But wrestling magazines are definitely the thing I buy if I go to a wrestling convention. There's a couple great memorabilia stores in New York and New Jersey. There's one really great one. I forget what it's called. It's a new one. It's fine. I went in there recently and I've got what's
sorry,
that,
Darren. I need to. We're doing the show. Let's bring on our guest and I'll explain what I'm laughing about. He is the official editor-in-chief of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the archivist of the magazine started in 1979. Also host of Pro Wrestling Indie-strated. Please welcome Kevin McElvaney. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm realizing now that I should have gotten my like the anti-glare on these glasses, because I tried to light this room properly, this dingy basement, and there's so much glare. So,
no, hey. I think the glare makes you look like you're in the Matrix. I think it's futuristic.
That's very kind. Thank you.
My intro was interrupted by, Darren's thought was interrupted by me laughing because I did credit you of official PWG, not PWI. So congrats.
That's fine.
On your
if I can get it work at PWG as well, geez, I'm doing pretty.
Why not? Well. Hey, right, take the paycheck.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Kevin is Super Dragon. Just want to clear that up.
Whoa, hey.
That's what Ross Berman said. It was like the first comment as soon as I retweeted it. It's pretty funny.
Darren, I did cut off your thought though. What were you saying before?
I don't remember, Brett. I have short memory loss. No, too many concussions, kid.
Well, Darren and I were reminiscing about the places we'd find Pro Wrestling Illustrated as kids. Where would you go? What was your introduction to this magazine?
God, probably Kmart. There was a Kmart down the street from where I grew up that carried PWI and any other wrestling magazine that was in wide circulation back then, quite a few of which were under the same umbrella as PWI. I don't know for sure that PWI or the wrestler or any of the related titles were the first ones I read. I feel like probably a WWF magazine first, or a WCW magazine. But I mean, I just got through those so fast. So it got to the point where basically anytime my mom went out shopping, it's like, all right, I'm going to get him a magazine. Like, I'll keep him busy for better part of a day. And, you know, from there, it just kind of blossomed. PWI taught me about a lot of wrestlers I'd never heard of before. I mean, this is to date me here. I mean, early 90s. So waning, like dying days of the territory, like the territorial system, just final last breaths. You know, WCW was very much, you know, in the national time slot, but not big deal. No Nitro yet, nothing like that. And, you know, at that same Kmart, I think I would buy like these really low budget VHSs that had some of the wrestlers that I'd seen the names of in PWI. So it was a really great learning experience for me early on, because, you know, you get a WCW magazine or a WWF magazine, it's specifically about that product. And it was cool to learn about this wrestling that I couldn't necessarily see on TV, and, you know, then go and actually watch it.
Yeah, so many people are chiming in on the chat. People that used to make flyers for their band's show with the after rags as Owen Straw. Yeah, I mean, it was on that cheap, you know, black and white paper. It's a lot more beautiful now, glossy.
Yeah,
but
well, correct me if I'm wrong, but Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the mothership magazine, as you might say, that was always in color, wasn't it? Or most of it was. At least it had the most color pages. I remember as a kid always like pulling out the posters of, I don't know, the Dungeon of Doom or whatever it was.
Every month you could find the Dungeon of Doom poster in the middle of the night.
There, I love the Taskmaster.
It had the most color. It would actually brag about that on the cover. It would say, you know, now with more color than ever. And I even, a couple of months back, we had a sort of retro cover, and it made an allusion to that. But no, it wasn't all color. I mean, it definitely had the cheap, I mean, it wasn't always black and white. It might've been like, you know, the trim was pink or something like that. Like it was more colorful than a lot of the other magazines of that style, of that era. It was the first one that went to an all glossy format. And it was, as you said, I mean, it was the flagship magazine. I mean, it wasn't the oldest, but it quickly became, you know, what we are known for.
Let's go to the hotline. We got a call.
Wow.
Hello, wrestler. You're joining Wrestling Club. Who are we speaking to?
Hey, it's Tom Green from Indiana.
Tom Green. Hello.
Hey, hi. Hey, I've got a question. So most, I don't want to say most, but a lot of listeners, I would imagine, know who Noli is. He's 8 years old. He's the most popular child in wrestling, other than -1 and.
Yeah, you got some stiff competition after last week's Little Prince of the Ring tournament we ran.
Yeah. But how do I get him ranked in the PWI 500? Because I feel like it would really enhance his college portfolio.
This is a good question.
Yeah.
This is a great question. Thanks for the call, Tom.
So if some people are to be believed, it involves a certain amount of money. And no, it's basically, you have to have a minimum number of matches. That's the starting point. And we had some people who you would expect to be on the 500 this year that are not on there because they didn't meet that threshold. And we didn't always define it, but now we do. And we're a little flexible with it last year, early pandemic, because everything was just completely unpredictable at that point. But it's 10 matches total over the 12-month evaluation period. Or if you don't have 10 matches, but you have 6 different months where you had at least a match. So someone who maybe, you know, a Super Dragon, for example, who maybe only competes at PWG, or if it's Nick Aldis in the NWA, he's not necessarily coming out and working every couple weeks at indie shows because he's going to come out and defend the title when he comes out. Those are the ways to qualify. So I would say it would kind of have it would be difficult for someone 8 years old to qualify because they really would have to be pretty active. And winning a championship.
Who is the youngest? Oh, sorry to interrupt, but who is the youngest person to ever be on the PWI 500?
You know, that's something
last week we did a Littlest Prince of the Ring where we had all the children competitors of wrestling history.
I can say that none of them were on. Although, wait, what did I see? Hornswoggle was somehow in the tournament.
We decided that was problematic. So
it seemed problematic, but I was okay. I didn't know if he was cool with it or
portrayed a child.
He did.
I stand by it.
He did portray a child. So if we're gonna go that way,
and Horny's like he's happy. He's like happy to be a little problematic too. So
he was actually on the list this year, which was his first time appearing on it, which I was shocked by. So if you're counting him kayfabe as still being a child, I guess it would be him. I really don't know. I don't know for sure. I can say that Billy Starks, who is on this year, is one of the younger wrestlers.
Yeah, I would think maybe. I mean, Ray, when he was like, I mean, the first time I heard about Rey Mysterio was in the PWI magazines, because I remember you'd always look at the rankings and I'd be like, who's this guy that weighs 120 pounds? How is he a wrestler? So like maybe he was on one of those early lists, you know. I mean, he was already full time by like 1990. He was what, like 13?
It's entirely possible. Yeah, and I mean, especially like in I don't know that it's the case anymore, but yeah, back in those days, I mean, a lot of luchadors would start out very young, and then keep wrestling until they're 70. I mean, it's just a very like you have to have a lot of stamina and toughness to keep going in Mexico. But yeah, if he was ranked back then, I guess he could have been. Although, I mean, how old is he now?
I don't know, Brett. How old is he? How old do you think he is?
I mean, with that,
let's all guess. Let's all guess before we look. Let's all guess before.
Okay.
I'm saying he is 42.
I'm gonna say like 47.
Brett,
I'll say 45. And I'll look too.
This is riveting.
Yeah, this is great content.
Let's guess.
732-200 club if you want to guess how old Rey Mysterio is. Yeah, you know, we're really doing
Rey
great.
Mysterio is 46.
46. So closest without going over was Brett.
Yeah, Brett got it. Price is Right rules.
Fuck you, Brett.
And then Tom Green really pushing for Noli to be part of this next PWI 500. Do amateur matches count? There, and it's sold out school gyms, so it's kind of like indie wrestling.
No, they don't count.
What's Noli's amateur gimmick? Shooter, right? He's just the shooter.
Yeah. Now, how about this? If Gable Steveson, who won the Olympic gold medal in wrestling and now is signed to WWE, will his gold medal contribute to his ranking?
Yes and no. Like this is assuming that he starts competing during this current evaluation period that we're in, right? Mm-hmm. The reason it may is because influence is a category, you know, and that's pretty open-ended. That's one of the more subjective categories that we have. But you look at things like, does the average person know who this wrestler is? And I think Kurt Angle is a great example of that, because yes, people knew him as an Olympic gold medalist, but I think they knew him more as the Olympic gold medalist who became a professional wrestler afterwards. I think that's a situation where you could look at, okay, it helped him, but it's not going to count in terms of like wins and losses. It would just be, you know, how important is this guy to the industry?
Well, I guess that's a question I have. What is the criteria for the PWI 500? Because it seems like over the years, I remember as a kid, you know, Hulk would be on it and Ric Flair, but then there's the one year where Dean Malenko was he number one, right? He was number one, wasn't he, in 97?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so what is the criteria in 2021 for the PWI 500?
So I will say that the Dean Malenko year is an outlier. It's kind of our most infamous year. Dean actually came on the PWI podcast. Al Castle had been pushing to interview him for a while because it was like, what did people say to him when he won this? Like, what are his thoughts on it? Because he must have been surprised as well. 97 was, you think about the business being really hot around then, or starting to get hotter. But the truth is there wasn't one standout like dominant world champion during that particular evaluation period. So that year it went to Dean Malenko for being essentially the best worker. I mean, he had, I think maybe multiple cruiserweight title reigns in that year.
Oh, absolutely. He was my favorite. I mean, I was 12 then, and he was my favorite wrestler because I was just getting older, you know? So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this guy is the best wrestler. He has the most moves. He's super serious. I remember Stone Cold came out, and I thought Stone Cold was kind of influenced by Dean Malenko and that he was like black boots, black trunks. Of course, he has a lot more charisma, natural charisma than Dean Malenko did. But I remember thinking then too, like, who's it going to be? You know, Bret Hart wasn't a dominant champion. You know, there's a lot of flux in the WWF main event scene. ECW was like kind of going through talent that year too. WCW was already a monstrosity.
Right.
So, you know, and I guess there wasn't, I don't even know with Japan. I guess Japan was doing all kinds of stuff.
Well, year. So that's the thing. So Stu Sachs, who I replaced as editor-in-chief, he was at the helm for many, many years. He didn't like officially say this, but he said, you know, maybe it should have been Misawa that year. Misawa was number 2 or 3 in the list. And he really did have this incredible, I don't want to say breakout year because people already knew who he was, like the hardcore fans. But I mean, he was really getting a lot of buzz stateside as much as anybody in Japan would have at that point without actually like going and being on WCW or something.
That's very true. Yeah, that's very true. I remember, I feel like I mean, I guess I would see him in the magazines, but that was also the year where he, I mean, 90 is the year he breaks out. 94 is the year where he has all those fantastic matches. I mean, it had been fantastic matches all the way up, but 97 is when it's like, oh, this guy is like a legend. This is a living legend.
I mean, it's also worth mentioning that, like, even though he would have been covered in the magazines, not as much as, I mean, sometimes it's a simple question of access. I mean, the people you can get interviews with, and yeah, maybe we'll get into it at some point, but like all the interviews weren't always on the up and up back then.
Oh, really?
But still, you need things like photos and things of that nature. So it was a little harder to run those stories. You know, occasionally somebody, I think Bill Apter got over to Japan a couple of times, but maybe the second one wasn't even when he was with PWI. That might have been WoW era. So, you know, that was a challenge. We did have a photographer in Japan who would send us photos so that we could do that. I don't know. I think maybe it's just like a reluctance on the part of the editors at that point. Like, okay, I don't know if our mostly North American audience is going to buy this. But, you know, I mean, if you go back, even you look at some of those really early PWIs and you see, and I mean, maybe this is by virtue of guys coming over on excursions and things like that, but the coverage was there. It wasn't necessarily front and center all the time, you know? So, and I think that's important.
I don't know if it was a PWI related magazine I picked up, but it was like from the early 70s. And it was actually Dory Funk Sr.'s like obituary episodes or issue where it's like all dedicated, which I thought was so cool. I love the Funks, but there's like a whole section on like early 70s Joshi. And I'm like, this is so funny to me. Like, wrestling fans have never changed. Like, hardcore wrestling fans have never changed. Like, yeah, there was one, I forget her name, but she was like the original Jumbo. Like, there's Jumbo Shruda, and then there was whoever she was. Do you remember?
Jumbo Miyamoto.
Jumbo Miyamoto.
Wow.
It has become a favorite of mine. I like the big, boring wrestlers. Anyway.
Well, PWI started in 1979.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is a little before that.
And the PWI 500 started in 1991. This year, let's take a look at who's number one. I'd love to say this is an announcement, but this has been out for a week now. Man Upstairs Isaiah, if we could show the cover star, Kenny Omega. He is a champion, or was a champion during this time in AEW, Impact, AAA. What has been the response to Kenny Omega's ranking here? It was controversial. I mean, it's always controversial, but
about what we expected. It was a close call with him and Roman. We stand by editorially. I think everybody felt good about choosing Kenny, given our criteria, which I don't think I actually explained in that last question. I wasn't trying to not explain it. But if you look at the kayfabe elements, and people like to call us a kayfabe list, and yes, that's part of it. We do consider things like influence and technical ability that are a little more, subjective, but we do look heavily at who was a champion in a major promotion, who was the top champion in a major promotion, what did their title reign look like, who did they defend the championship against, what losses did they have, if any. And when you look at Kenny, I mean, just about any metric, fewer eyeballs on him than on Roman Reigns, but every other category, we'll put that under influence just for sake of simplicity. Kenny had it. And that's, we had a little bit of back and forth about it, but pretty comfortably landed on it. We expected when it came out that we'd have a lot of people who were like, yeah, of course, that's the pick. And then other people would be furious that it wasn't this person or that person. I don't know if the two of you have noticed this, but AEW and WWE fans get very angry at one another. And for some reason feel that you can't like both promotions. I
Why?
don't. Like, here I was thinking all these years that it's okay to like a bunch of different wrestling promotions at the same time, but I found out that that's apparently like the worst thing you can do.
Well, I mean, you know the big AFL NFL feud. I don't know, get a life, people. Whatever. Like,
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, yeah, but wrestling is good and bad. Well, we're really hard. We're really digging in tonight. We're really getting deep.
wrestling is good and bad.
I'm looking at I'm just kind of looking at some of these like historical lists right now, like the top 10 for all the years here, and like, yeah, I mean, WWF has definitely has the most. I mean, even like the 90s era when there was the competition, they have the most. What do you think? Like, I mean, I guess you kind of answered that already. I don't know. I'm just thinking about like my top wrestler of the year was Kenny Omega, just because, yeah, he had great matches. He's a world champion. He's very exciting. He's got a new I don't know if to say gimmick, but it's just like he's freshened up a lot. And so is Roman, but Roman doesn't have the exciting programs as much, which isn't his fault. It's very close. It's very close.
Well, I mean, that's one just to break it down a little more. I mean, Roman's doing, I don't think too many people would argue this is the best work he's been doing in his career. He's been number one in the 500 before. And he was better this year than he was that year. But you have to consider all these criteria. And yeah, his win-loss record's good. I don't want to say he's wrestling. I don't know off the top of my head how many matches less than Kenny he may have had. But there was certainly a perception like he would just disappear from TV for a couple of weeks and Heyman would talk, or he would just come out and talk and not wrestle. And WWE used to get this leg up on the activity front because there'd be house shows, but no house shows until very, very recently, after the evaluation period ended. And then if you look at the diversity and depth of competition, which that's one of the criteria. And was Kenny facing all main eventers all the time? Well, no. I mean, he definitely defended against some people who are lower on the card, but he wrestled in these three major promotions, defending all the championships. Granted, not super active in AAA, but I mean, AAA did not have a lot of shows to begin with. And then it was difficult for him to get over there and still remain active with AEW and then Impact. But if you look at Roman Reigns, the stuff he did with Jey Uso, those two matches, incredible. Like, really just very different kind of, like, if you want to say sports entertainment is distinct from pro wrestling, they're two different styles or whatever, that was like the pinnacle of what I think personally the sports entertainment side of it could be. It was this really epic WWE main event style. It's not about work rate. It's about telling a story. The fact that they didn't have a crowd there let them do some kind of experimental things, like extended conversations back and, well, not so much back and forth because Jay is all beat up. As good as those matches were, Roman Reigns was main eventing early in his title reign against this guy who has really never had a singles run of note. It's to the point where anytime we would rank the Usos, unless one of them was inactive for a stretch because of injury or whatever, it was kind of a toss up who ranked where. But you would have to like look who picked up more pinfalls or who won like a random singles match that they had during a tag feud. So viewed that way until WrestleMania, when he had that incredible defense, but just again, speaking pure storyline and the quality of competition, beating Daniel Bryan and Edge at the same time. Before that, I mean, he didn't have that level of competition Kenny had. And I've used this elsewhere, and I really don't mean it to be a negative, because Roman's promos have been, I'm not a big long promo guy, but they're great. Like, that's an exception for me. We're Pro Wrestling Illustrated. We're not Pro Promo Illustrated. Like, it's like, yes, that figures into it because it's part of the presentation. But at the end of the day, we have these roots as this sports publication internally at our parent company. We're still the sports department. We're not the pop culture or the entertainment department. And there's still elements of that in the magazine. We still, most of the time, don't say someone's a performer. We say they're a competitor, competed, as opposed to, performed, so just something to keep in mind. And I mean, we're not pretending it's real anymore. We'll refer to it as an art form and as a type of entertainment. But I think if we completely get rid of treating it like a sport, this list becomes a lot more subjective. It looks very similar year after year. Not to go on a tangent here, but there was a thing the other day where the Wrestling Observer radio, Meltzer and Alvarez were saying something about, like, why is Braun Strowman 40 places higher than Hiroshi Tanahashi? And like, well, like I know Dave Meltzer did an interview with PWI, the Hot Seat, the previous issue. He knows what we do. I don't know if he was just that worked up. Like, yeah, Tanahashi is 100 times the worker that Braun Strowman is. That's not even enough. He's 300 times the worker he is. But Tanahashi was a mid-carder essentially this year. He didn't have a big title reign. He was never open weight champion later in the period. And if you're looking at what he meant to New Japan, I mean, he was feuding with Great Khan at Wrestle Kingdom. Like, this was not a big year for Tanahashi. This was Tanahashi's, I'm going to hang back and work with some of the younger guys year. Why would you put him up in like the top 30? It doesn't make any, given the criteria that we've been using year after year. Again, like, we could say the best work rate is the deciding factor every year. Okay, fine. Dan O'Brien wins every year. There, we're not going to argue. Or if, depending on your taste, maybe it's Okada or whoever else. But that, to me, that's not interesting at all. I think the reason people like this is because these criteria, even if they don't always agree with the way that we do it, they can kind of think about, like, oh, I bet this person will be here and blah, blah, blah. And, we can justify it or not justify it. And then it's actually a discussion. It's not just like, these are my favorite things, and I'm going to tell you that my opinion's more valid than yours. Does that make sense?
Well, speaking of my favorite things, Darren, you said that your favorite, or you felt that Kenny Omega was the best wrestler. Maybe he was your favorite of the year. My personal favorite of the year, I didn't think would even qualify. However, imagine shock. And if people that listen to this show week to week for the past year will know I have been standing by this person, wearing her on my hat. Isaiah, could you show us the alternate cover of this year? And this is official. This is from you guys. We didn't mock this up.
No, this is real.
Lulu Pencil, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated cover star. This means so much to me.
I'm glad to hear that.
I've never connected with a wrestler so much.
When Brett texted me the cover, I thought, in my mind, I was like, Brett, you did such a good job. I thought he made it because it's something that, he really cares. Lulu Pencil is one of his favorites. I love Lulu too. I mean, I'm not a Lulu hater. I feel like number 500 was always, when you're a kid and you read the PWI 500, it gets those like 300, 400s are real obscure. So yeah, I don't know.
500 always has a very special place. Famously, Duke the Dumpster Droese was hired when he was Garbage Man by the WWE because they were like, we can make anyone a star. Let's hire Garbage Man. And to some extent we're successful. I was certainly a fan. Shockwave the Robot. Who are some of the other 500 picks?
Well, last year was Dan the Dad. Puff was one year. It tends to be a comedic gimmick. It's not always. Maybe it has actually gotten a little bit away from that in recent years, and then we kind of started to like, no, that's fun. People like that. We should go back to that. Yeah, Lulu Pencil seemed like the perfect fit. Especially, I mean, if you look at her win-loss record, I don't think she won some tag matches, but it wasn't
Her loss
her
record.
necessarily won the
call
tag
it a
matches.
loss record.
She loses well though.
She loses well, and she has this huge, huge rabid following, international. And I mean, like, we're getting a lot of positive feedback on it. It's not, there's some of it's in English, some of it's in Japanese, some of it's in Spanish. I think I saw some Portuguese in there. It's really cool how just across the globe, people are tuning into Choco Pro and seeing her, and, you know, all the other great, fun, talented wrestlers on that show. But I thought Lulu was just perfect for that, and certainly notable enough to be on the list. But yeah, like, it'd be hard to put her over some people who have championships and things like that. When we released it, Paro actually brought it up, of No Peace Underground. He took to Twitter and he said, it would be really cool, like, hey, PWI, who's number 500? Like, it would be really cool if whoever it is, they get an alternate cover. And I thought, well, geez, that's perfect. Like, people would really like that. I said, sure. Like, if like our artist has some time to do it, like, she'll make it. So I talked to Laura, and she's like, yeah, that sounds really fun. And also, this might be my new favorite wrestler. She doesn't really care about wrestling, but she saw the pictures of Lulu and was just like, oh my God, she's great.
Yeah. Nothing has ever more targeted towards me specifically than this in professional wrestling. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you.
Yeah,
Pencil
no
Army
problem.
all fucking day.
I
but
guess
this
we'll
is
have
the
to-
bigger thing that I wanted to bring up is that you've taken over. When did you take over this role?
Well, Stu officially retired last June, like the beginning of last June, but I came in and started the role as editor and learning it last March, right before the pandemic started. And then not long after was at home learning it virtually, and then back in the office not terribly long after that. I was back maybe like 4 or 5 weeks after everything really started in the US in earnest. But even then, we were set up in different parts of the office. We were on the phone, we were Zooming, you know, even though we're a couple 100 feet apart or whatever. A lot of people were still working remotely at that point. Our graphic designers were working from home. But there were some things I really did kind of need to be on site to learn, and like, I had to be shown where things were. And, you know, we have this photo archive, the past magazines, different things, just simple basic stuff. Like, I had to learn how to use this specific photo scanner we have to digitize some of these old images as needed. So that started, you know, after, I guess, about 13, 14 years freelancing with the magazine. Maybe not, you know, certainly not every single issue, but on and off for 13, 14 years. And Stu, you know, kind of just touched base with me and said, you know, you can't tell anybody this, but I'm thinking about stepping down. This was late 2019, I guess. Would you be interested? I think you might be good for this. Like if you want, come in, we'll talk about it. And we did. And then, you know, I mean, we're part of a larger parent company. I had to interview formally and all that, but having Stu's recommendation was kind of everything I needed. And yeah, I mean, since then it's been wild. I still, every single day, am shocked that I'm doing this. I have to just sit back and like, whoa, wow. Like, I can't believe it. I mean, I grew up reading the magazine. I, you know, was super excited just to be involved with it years ago. And thought, okay, well, I have that. Nobody can ever take that away from me. And then for this to happen, like, you know, just really humbling.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point I noticed, and my opinion of Wrestling Illustrated, especially prior to doing this show, when I was slightly a bit more withdrawn from the world of wrestling. I you know, I was always happy Pro Wrestling Illustrated was still there for, you know, a long train ride or a plane ride or something. It wasn't necessarily appointment reading because I, you know, I kind of like a slightly more niche side of the world of wrestling. But I did really take notice because it seemed like there's been a movement within the magazine and the way that certain world titles are now raised up in the eyes of the magazine. More attention to independent wrestling, smaller promotions. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's when I first came in, I was kind of cautious, especially first issue or two I was working on, and especially when Stu was still in the office. I was kind of testing the waters with certain things. And I remember an early thing I said to him was, we spell indie INDY. That's ridiculous. No other kind of media does that. Like, it's indie music, IE, indie film, IE, indie video games, IE. Like, we look really out of date. If we're not talking about Indiana wrestling, it should be IE. And he's like, oh, see, I never even thought about that. You should have mentioned that. And I'm like, I didn't want to mention it before because I didn't like want to seem like I was acting, above it or whatever. But like little things like that. The first issue that I actually had any creative input on, we did a story on Nick Gage, which I stand by. I mean, anyone who's seen his Dark Side of the Ring episode knows this. Really compelling human story behind him, because he was like at his absolute lowest and he came back, and he was able to do it through the strength of his fans and having something to come back to. And he, reformed his life, really. I mean, it's amazing. And the writer who took that story on, Mike Bessler, is just really good at that kind of very personal human story. And we experimented with a little bit of stuff like that, and I was periodically slipping that stuff in, but trying not to scare off the old readers too much.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was just like something about the combination of, I mean, the fact that print media is a very fragile thing anyway. I mean, like, magazines go away all the time, and we're doing pretty well. And as long as people can continue to support, I don't see us going anywhere soon, but you never know. That plus pandemic, plus I've talked about this in the magazine and on social media, but my wife Megan she's doing a lot better now, but she was diagnosed with advanced bile duct cancer last year. So it was a really scary whirlwind time. Honestly, I'm glad that if I hadn't started the job at the magazine, it would have been a lot harder to be the strength that she needed, because I was kind of like, okay, I'll go to work, I'll do my job I really like, I'll come home and I'll be like, what do you need? Like, at your beck and call, that kind of thing. And to her credit, she's never stopped working. She's been like remotely the whole time. But I say all this to point out, like, God, anything could happen to any of us tomorrow. Why wait? Why gradually try to put this stuff in? Do I want to completely alienate longtime readers? Of course not. As a longtime reader myself, it's the last thing I want to do. But the PWI I grew up with had the territories mentioned. It had wrestlers from other countries mentioned. It wasn't, we're going to cover the people who are on TV the most. That's not what it was. It had these fun stories, these human elements. It had, blood and guts sometimes. And that stuff never entirely went away. But I thought, we've got to take some chances, because yes, like, we have these loyal longtime readers, and some of them will like the changes and some won't. And that's definitely been my experience. But there's people who read the magazine years ago and then just like, okay, this isn't for me anymore. Like, do I really need to read a PR interview with this person and blah, 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 and I do think that Stu, at least as editor, was always sure to do his best to make it like, you got to find the human element. If it's somebody who gets interviewed all the time and we're going to cover them, we need to cover them better and differently. So, all the credit in the world to him for that. But I do think that we needed to feature some different people to cover. It's huge right now. You have services like IWTV that are making it a lot more visible, but it's also, just look at what's happening with the independent wrestlers. They're showing up in Ring of Honor. They're showing up on AEW Dynamite. They're getting, winning championships. I mean, Tony Deppen won the Ring of Honor TV title. Like, that should really tell you all you need to know there. And one thing that I firmly believe about PWI readers, and again, as a long-term reader myself, is that they want to know about things before everybody else does. Like, and I don't mean getting scoops. I mean, they want to know who the hot new wrestlers are. They want to know what feuds to pay attention to. They want to know what's going on that they can't see just by turning on their TV. So took some steps with that. Just personally, I mean, I'm kind of like you are with this, Brett. I watch in my spare time. Like, if I'm just watching to watch and not keeping up, it's like a ton of indie stuff. It's a ton of Japanese stuff. Like, I went through a huge like deathmatch phase last year. It's just, checking out new and different things. And I love classic wrestling as well. But, you know, it's good to check out new and different things. So that has, of course, made its way into the magazine. And I know a couple of the writers, and especially some of the new ones, this is the stuff they love as well. So yeah, like, of course we're going to cover it, and we're never going to stop covering WWE and the WWEs of the world as long as they're around. But I think it's important to put these other companies, these other wrestlers on people's radar, because at the end of the day, they're going to be grateful that they know about it now.
Yeah, you did the award presentation in the one place that Darren and I actually have had our single match in South Jersey. But there is that lineup of everybody with their plaques, and it's Orange Cassidy, Wheeler Yuta, Trisha Dora. It's like, these are really cool people, and it's cool that PWI, which has all of this history and weight to it. I mean, the AEW will post videos of wrestlers getting their plaques and stuff. It's Kenny Omega was bragging about it on Dynamite being number one. It doesn't, it's
Old
it's
school
it's
that
not
way.
nothing.
I mean, that's the way it was in the 80s with NWA.
It was.
After was always on it. And I just think it gives, I mean, WWE has been so tightly controlled for so long, and that's what we grew up with. But I'm old enough to remember the end of the territories and that it was done differently. So yes, there's a new spin on Pro Wrestling Illustrated, but it's still old school. Like you said, people want to know the new wrestlers. They want to know the hot feuds. They want to know what's going on where. And it's like a digest for wrestling fans.
That's exactly it. That's the whole thing that I like. It's your go-to. And especially I think now there's value in that, because you have there's more wrestling than anybody could possibly watch. You would need to clone yourself several times and be awake all the time watching wrestling if you want to see everything internationally, nationally, independent. We're never going to be able to cover it all. We try our best to cover the stuff that's worth seeing. And we are always in touch with a lot of different people, and have people who have on staff who have different expertise levels and different, niches. But yeah, I really just think this is what PWI always did. It's just that up until a few years ago, WWE really did have that. I mean, certainly Impact and Ring of Honor and New Japan existed, but there was this kind of stranglehold. And I think it's especially cool now to see things like, I mean, the independent wrestlers that we were talking about a moment ago. I mean, those are all people who are showing up on cable TV now, which is awesome. And I mean, we could have
upstairs. Can we see the wrestling club members?
Oh,
I like to think of Dusty Rhodes winning the NWA title, and like he's got the PWI shirt on, and I was like, it's so cool that all these people that we're friends with or just been on the show are getting this spotlight. You mentioned Billy Starks earlier. Effie got extremely high placement. There's clearly, just by this image alone, more of an emphasis on diversity. What is the criteria as far as gender goes? Because we've got 19 women in this year's PWI.
It's more than that. It's closer to
29.
30, yeah.
So
it is a little bit confusing, and even internally we debate this, and there are some of the staff, not most, thinks like it should just all be one list. Because the idea that you would have to separate and say that this person doesn't belong in a list with this person, it is a little weird on its face. When the PWI 500 got started, there was no women's wrestling of note really in the US. In Japan, it was still very much a thing. But in North America in the early 90s, women's divisions would get launched for a little bit, and then they would get, taken off TV basically. Absolutely not fair. There were great wrestlers even back then. I mean, we last year's editor award winner Medusa, just right there, so it's not a comment on talent, it's just how it was presented. And even now, I think that's what keeps us where we have this list, and we also still have the women's list, which we are expanding this year. It's the women's 150. The way women are ranked in the 500 is actually the way they've always been ranked in the 500, going back to Jackie Moore in 1993. It's based mostly on intergender competition. It doesn't have to exclusively be that, but if somebody's competing for the same championships that men are, then why wouldn't they be ranked alongside them? It doesn't make sense not to. And I think last year that was something I wanted to come in and talk about, but I think everybody is a lot more open to it because, you know, nobody likes to hear the name anymore for various reasons, but like Tessa Blanchard was the Impact World Champion. That was a big thing, even though it was shrouded in controversy for obvious and understandable reasons. The fact that she won and the fact that a company would do that, regardless of who it is, like a major televised company, you know, it happened on the indies sometimes. That felt like a shift to me, you know, and Impact will still have intergender wrestling. And, you know, Jordan Grace was competing for the X Division title last year. But that's just the lay of the land in the indies. There are fewer women's titles, fewer women's promotions, fewer opportunities for women. So to me, yeah, like a woman could be ranked on the women's list, but if she's winning championships or vying for championships in Game Changer Wrestling or beyond or whatever else, it doesn't make sense to say, okay, you go over here because you're a woman, you're on this list, no other list. And then not everybody fits neatly into the gender binary anyway. So much of it's outdated and you have 9 binary wrestlers and it's like, well, pick a list. What list do you want to go on? That's ridiculous. So the way we kind of treat it is we have these, if you look on our website, we have weekly ratings, which become our monthly ratings, you know, they feed into each other. And then theoretically the 500 and the women's list are, and the tag team ranking that we do now are all sort of extensions of those things. They're, you know, there's only 10 spots in the magazine, but if you kept expanding them and then tying all the different promotions in, that's what the 500 is. So given that, you know, a Tessa Blanchard or look on the independents, like a Trish Adora or maybe a Kylie Ray could and have ranked in the heavyweight rankings or overall, like, and we called them just the top 10 and like, okay, well, why is it the top 10? All these are top 10s. Seemed wrong to call it the men's list because that's not what it is either. It's the heavyweight rankings, for lack of a better term. It's like the world heavyweight title rankings. So we look at that. Anybody who could potentially be on that list qualifies for the 500. There's the separate women's top 10. And that's, again, those wrestlers can be on that too, but the focus there, and even like someone like Trish Adora, the focus on her women's 150 ranking would be less on her Pan-African World Diaspora title defenses, or at least the ones against men. It'd be more on how did she do in the Ring of Honor women's division? How did she do in Women's Wrestling Revolution? How did she do this place, that place? So just treating it like divisions. And yeah, it's a little weird, but that's gender in 2021. There's a lot of crossover and a lot of overdue things happening, really. So we're just trying to make it make sense in the way that we've always done this with the magazine. And for years, that's when a woman did occasionally rank, it was, you know, Jackie Moore, Chyna, Luna Vachon, Mad Maxine, and Sarah Del Rey. They all ranked by virtue of competing well against not just women, but also men. That was a very long answer. I apologize for probably putting everybody to sleep.
Very interesting. And like, I just think about, I don't know, it's good that PWI is reflecting changes, you know, because especially like I find like old school wrestling things have a lot of trouble with that stuff, just like old school anything, right? So it's really it's really refreshing to hear that, you know, a magazine that I loved so much as a youth is not stuck in the past where I remember it so well.
And I mean, maybe, well, thank you. And I mean, maybe in 5 years, we'll look back and see like, oh, you know what? Like that was a weird way of doing it. We should have just like made it all one list. And if that's the case, and we realize that there's reasons we haven't, and it has more to do with like, all right, now I feel like I have to say it. So if you have a lot of women who are performing at a very high level and you could imagine where they would go on the list, you know, like the women who are at the top of WWE, for example, probably do very well, be high in the top 10. But what about the women who didn't have any championships all year because there's only 2 women's championships? Or the women who are on, I mean, not to pick on them, I love AEW, but Hikaru Shida was champion all year and she was hardly on TV. You know, like how do you justify putting Hikaru Shida above like a Darby Allin or somebody who's on TV all the time winning matches? It's weird. And, you know, you can account for these things a little bit if you consider like, okay, this women's division versus this women's division, and maybe WWE's women's division gets a little more precedence because it's higher competition level or something like that. So again, it is weird. It's squishy. It's wrestling in 2021.
And it's a work, and God bless you for putting so much thought into this thing that
I know.
like,
Well, the thing
WWE
is-
doesn't put the thought into, you know?
No, well, I mean, the thing is, I get, and a few years ago when I wasn't in the, like the position of power, so to speak, I was just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna go in the meeting and I'll say the things I want to say, but like they're not gonna listen to me maybe. And but now I'm kind of like, well, you know, I would get mad at any other thing for this. Like if Rolling Stone put out a list of the top 100 albums and it was mostly dude music and mostly like white rock bands or whatever, like I would, like, you know, there's other good stuff out there, and Rolling Stone doesn't, you know, do that especially anymore, but you know, there's a problem with that in media in general. And I was the first person to get mad about that kind of stuff, and it's like, well, why does wrestling get a pass, you know? So like, since I'm there, and I mean, we do it where it makes sense, nobody's getting anywhere that they don't deserve to be, but you know, we're just looking places that we didn't look before, and we're not just assuming like the only way that you get on our radars if you're on television. That's that to me, especially when people are not necessarily watching TV live at the same time anymore, it just kind of feels outdated.
Is there any changes that you think you might implement in a long-term fashion, and anything that you'd like to see change within the mag? I mean, I know, like, you know, the buck stopped at you, but you know, like you said, you don't want to alienate people.
Yeah, and also, like, I mean, if I don't want all of our writers to be like, you know what, I don't want any part of this, I'm going to leave, and then I have to find a whole new roster. I want like buy-in. Everybody might not love everything, but I want all of us to feel good about the overall direction of the magazine.
Yeah.
God, that's a big question, though. I mean, my thing lately has just been trying to cover some of the wrestling that we haven't been covering as much. So that's been reaching out to some of the international promotions, with a lot of times with, thankfully, a lot of them do have English language social media accounts and things like that you can get in touch with, because I speak a little Spanish and not much, and that's it, you know. But like things like Google Translator, I mean, I've like, hey, who do I talk to at your promotion to get photos and stuff like that? And like, and when it's funny, because when Stu found out I was doing this stuff, he's like, geez, I didn't really like think about that. Like, he had connections at New Japan from way back, and certainly like anything major that really needed to be covered would like make its way to our office. But like, I want to be proactive about that stuff, because there's just a lot of cool things out there that different people like, that will bring different people. Like, we've gotten all these Joshi fans who followed us, and not in many, you know, their main language seems to be Japanese, and are following us and ordering mostly digital, because it takes forever to get a magazine over to Japan from the US. But they're ordering the magazine, and they're interacting with our stuff, and that's awesome. Like, that's really cool. And I'm glad that we can give, you know, even if it's just they like that the wrestlers are being featured. I like being able to have that sense of community a little bit. And I mean, Japan doesn't need, well, I shouldn't say they don't need North American coverage, but if Japanese promotions want magazine covers, they have plenty of it over there. Like, there's wealth of wrestling magazines still over there. But to the credit of these different promotions, they've all been really happy to work with us. And you know, there's a time zone difference, so the emails will be exchanged over a few days sometimes, but like, it's really cool. That's one of the things I'm most proud of, because that was something we were really lacking in before. And I don't think that's anybody's fault. I think it's just hard to make those connections if you don't already have them. So sometimes it's just sending a DM and risking that someone might be like, who are you? Like, what, you know, like, and if that happens, who cares? Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that I would say specifically, we've been doing better with Japan, and in next couple of months, we're gonna have some more exciting stuff coming from Japan. We haven't been doing too great with Mexico, I think, over the last 5-10 years. I want to do better there. And you know, been in touch with some people. So I know that's not a big, like, drastic change to the magazine. Like, simple answer, I'd like to start putting like specials out again, like extra magazines that go on the newsstands, or like, I don't know beyond that. I mean, I daydream about like, oh, let's go to 12 magazines again, because we're at 9 now, but then that's a lot. We don't have a big staff in house, so we'll see. Just do more of everything. That's my answer.
Yeah. I personally, I would love to see a redesign. I think there's a lot of cool visual art wrestling that I feel like, getting like the Orange Crush magazine. I was like, oh wow, something like this is like what I wanted, 15 years ago. Looking at
That's
like
so
this,
good. I love the Orange Crush stuff, and we've been done a couple little things with them. It's so, but I mean that's like an art book. It's like something you would buy in a gift shop. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
My favorite thing every year that I look forward to from PWI, and I don't know if they do it anymore. I know they stopped for a while, was the almanac.
Yeah, we don't do the almanac. So the almanac got kind of unwieldy after a while, and the sales were not high enough to justify keep on making it.
Well, me and Brett bought it every year.
So, I mean, a bunch of people tell us this, but like, even if a few hundred people like message and, oh, why don't you make this? Like I'm going to take that to my boss and say, hey, here's a few hundred people who will buy the almanac. I'm like, yeah, we're not going to print a few hundred copies. Like we have to print it at a greater quantity to make it, like, I mean, we could print it at smaller quantities, but then it's going to be that thing like where you have like a record is re-released on vinyl. And like, yeah, pre-order it now, it's $40 because like we're only going to make 300 of them, it'd be that kind of thing, which I don't think anybody wants. Maybe I think it would be cool to do kind of like a coffee table book version of the almanac, and like, maybe update it every couple of years.
When I was a kid, I think maybe it was George Napolitano, but he shot for you guys. He must have some pictures in the archive there.
Oh yeah, and he still does.
I remember as a kid, my dad bought me his coffee table book when I was like 6, and 6 or 7. I remember him. It was for Christmas, and he pulls it out, and I open it, and I'm like so excited. He's like, "Yeah, I was just reading that yesterday," and I was like, "But Dad, it says it's from Santa." He's like, "Oh, I mean, I just read it now." So it was actually because coffee table books that my childhood was ruined.
So George Napolitano spoiled Santa Claus for you. I'm going to tell him that the next time.
That's right. That's what he did. But I loved it. I remember there's just like all these pictures of, it was just so cool, especially at that age. I didn't know who like Kevin Sullivan and Woman were, but I was like, oh, these people are scary. This is something.
I remember, I think I remember the same exact book maybe, because I remember noting them too. Yeah. Who's this guy with an X shaved into his chest hair? Yeah, what is, and we can end with this. What is if there's a single one that comes to mind, or just a few of the crazier, like, wow, like I can't believe this is here, that you found
in the archive? You mean
archive? Yeah.
Oh my God. So I'm some of the apartment wrestling photos that are
yes,
like
yes.
So keep in mind, the apartment wrestling.
Can you share a Google Drive of that?
They're not digitized, but
I'll digitize
them. But some of those were really like, as time went on, there was like a demand. They got like racier and racier, and then eventually it was like, I don't know if the Weston mag group like released any uncensored ones, or if it was a different place that did that. But there were
definitely other magazines. It wasn't theirs. Theirs were
okay. All right. So some of those photos are in the archive, and I don't know if it was just they sent them along and we didn't use them. but like PWI had this, the publishing company. I mean, basically, if there's a photo, I mean, we look at it as like an archive, and it's like, okay, well, we can't use this, but like we're going to preserve it, kind of thing. Like there are definitely photos in the archive that are like, oh, well, this is not like a good photo, but it's from this historic night, and like we're not going to like just jettison the photo. We're going to store it and make sure it's safe. But like, so I don't know if they were ever used for anything, or if they were just, but they were there.
Darren and I have a friend who found who found out, who was like hot in the family computer. Do you know what I'm talking about, Darren?
Yeah, it's fine. We don't want to get too many details.
Yeah, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I'm not naming names, but finding out that he was constantly Googling apartment wrestling, and we were like, wow, there actually was like an audience for that.
It's funny. There was actually a joke about it in Jason Conlon's Drawing Blood column like last month. I think he made a reference to apartment I think it was actually it started as like the setup was people really want to see the almanac come back. I'm like, oh, I thought they would have wanted apartment wrestling in this day and age. And
You know, I feel
Hey,
like
I mean,
I feel like apartment wrestling in this day and age is one thing. Let's not tell Choco Pro about it. I feel like they could be misled. They'd be like, "Oh, this is fun. We love wrestling."
It's funny too, because when we had there's in the comic, there's like it's like a collage style, like where sometimes they'll like paste a magazine cover into it or whatever. And it wasn't apartment wrestling, wasn't cover. And we really had to dig through and make sure that it was something that was visibly apartment wrestling on the cover, but like we're a lot more family friendly these days. So like we don't want like somebody who buys this for their kid and like, oh my God, what is in the back of the PWI? Like,
yeah, I remember getting those magazines when I was a kid. My parents didn't look at them too much.
Yeah, it's that and just I mean, you find random stuff too, like like I don't know. I think I found a picture of like Billy Kidman with Dennis Miller and WCW. Like there's just all these weird like
yeah, can you share that? Can you throw it in the apartment wrestling folder?
Yeah, we're just gonna have a custom, but there's just all these random photos that you like, and then sometimes too, like there's a picture, and I posted this one to social, but it was Bill Apter took it, and it was I think it was at a Cauliflower Hour Alley reunion in the 80s, and it was a picture of Ric Flair with The Rock as a teenager, but it was labeled as like Rocky Johnson's son Dwayne, and it's like a very old photo print. And like back then, that was just like, okay, that's kind of cool. I don't even know if they printed it or not, or maybe they printed it once, and like people probably forgot it's in the archives. But like here's The Rock as a teenager with his like pencil thin mustache, and he's like in a like really ugly looking button up shirt, and he's posed with Flair, he's in the suit, and like it's just cool to see stuff like that from before people were stars, and like it was just filed away like it was a normal picture. So that's the other.
Wow. Well, yeah. Archiving is such hard work. Running a magazine is such hard work. And especially during a pandemic and making these changes that maybe a portion of people might be resistant to. It's all a lot. So I congratulate you, and I think all the changes are okay in my book. So
thank you. I'm glad I have someone's approval. So that's
my approval means a lot more. Yeah. But what can we look forward to in the future, next couple months?
Yeah, so the 500 issue is it's going to be hitting newsstands on the 28th. If you go to pwi-online.com, you can pre-order the print copy. There's a link there to download the digital edition, which is a little bit cheaper. I like the print version. We're going to continue to offer the digital, but that's just me. I like the legacy physical object in your hand, all that. So that's coming out this month. Next month, the digital edition of the women's 150 issue is coming out. And that's, I can say, I don't want to give too much away of what's in the issue, but it is a larger like focus on women in wrestling. It's not just the list. There's some other cool stuff going on there, including coverage of some recent events. So you could probably figure out what some of that is. After that, we have the tag team 50 issue. We're really going all in on the lists.
Wow. That's cool. Tag teams are back. So that's really exciting.
Yeah. And last year it was a whole tag team issue. This year it's not going to be that, because we don't want it to be too gimmicky, 3 issues in a row, but the list will be in there. And then the following issue after that will be the year-end award, achievement award, year in review issue, and that'll be out in the early part of the year. So that's all coming up over the next few months. At this point, it may be a little late to get the 500 as part of your subscription, like if somebody were to go to the website and subscribe. But if they do sign up now, if they don't get the 500, if they don't meet that date for it, then they would at least have next year's in it. So like the 500 comes with your subscription, so do all these other issues. So just always got to plug that. Or some people just like to go out and select this magazine from the store, or have it sent to them in the sealed envelope. That it's all good. It all helps us to continue to do this and get the word out about great pro wrestling.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. You taking the time out, your busy schedule.
Yeah, this is so exciting for us as just old school wrestling magazine nerds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
same.
you know, if you like Wrestling Club, tune in next week. We might have a very, very special episode. Let's knock on wood. Card subject change as always. But Darren, what do you got going? You got your WFMU show. Same
That's
spot.
right. Same spot. I'm at midnight Saturday night. I'll be playing music this week. I'm going to be taking a week off. I don't know if it's next week or the following week, but then October, I'm back. It's the October Hellraiser, WFMU's formerly silent auction. Now it's not so silent. Not auction, fundraiser. It's our October Hellraiser. So I'll have a couple special shows. So
we might do another Brawloween.
We're not doing Brawloween.
Okay.
Something's already booked that night. Actually, I should say now, I'm going to be doing a very spooky Halloween episode with some legends of Baltimore underground rock, Human Host, as well as Rick Weaver. Those names probably don't mean much to wrestling fans, but it's going to be a night of weird stuff. So that'll be Devil's Night.
Well, we could still do a Brawloween. We'll just do it as a podcast.
We can do it as a podcast, yeah. And maybe there'll be some wrestling stuff sometime in October, but definitely check that out. The October Hellraiser. They'll have T-shirts and buttons and stickers and all the rest, and all the money goes to WFMU to keep the lights on. So stay tuned for that. We'll talk more about that next month.
I was going to say I'm 1/3 of the way to a Lulu Pencil costume. So we'll see.
What do you have, Brett? The pencil?
I have the hat.
We got to get the pencil. I got to get those.
I guess we should get the pink hat. We'll talk about this. Darren, why don't you take us out?
All right. That'll do it for Wrestling Club. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks to Kevin McElvaney. Shout outs to the man upstairs, Isaiah, Steve D for the theme song, and the fine folks at WFMU Radio. If you dig Wrestling Club, please like, share, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, invite your friends, check out the archive, and spread the word. Wrestling Club will return next Monday night live at 9 on YouTube, so please check it out. But until then, for Brett, I'm Darren. This has been Wrestling Club. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
The Wrestling Club with Darren and Brett. We've got a show that you'll never forget.